They said it was out of love, that I was slipping, that my mind was no longer my own. Even Father Malcolm, my shepherd of 30 years, sat there with pity in his eyes, asking me to sign everything over my finances, my dignity, my voice. But I didn't argue. I simply smiled and said, "Father, perhaps you should check the church's deed registry." That was the moment the room fell silent, because the house they were trying to take was never theirs to begin with. It never was. And now they would finally understand just how deeply I had planned in silence. My name is Agnes Dwyer, and I am 80 years old. I've lived in the same white clapboard house for nearly half a century. The porch creaks the same way it did when my husband Robert built it with his bare hands. The lilac bushes still bloom each spring, just like they did the year we moved in. And every Sunday, for as long as my bones allowed, I walked exactly 7 blocks to St. Bartholomew's Church, rain or shine. That church wasn't just a place of worship. It was my second home, my sanctuary, the compass that helped me raise my children, bury my husband, and survive the long, quiet winters of widowhood. I suppose you could say I'm a simple woman. I never traveled far, never made much noise. I clipped coupons, sent handwritten birthday cards, and baked banana bread for the parish fundraiser. I trusted people, maybe too much. I believed in kindness, in long conversations over tea, in the soft touch of grace, especially my children, especially Father Malcolm. There are moments when life doesn't just disappoint you, it cleaves you in two. The day Robert died was one. And then much later, the day I saw the way my son looked at my bank statements, the way my daughter suddenly stopped bringing the grandkids around, the whispers, the sideways glances, the gentle suggestions that I rest more, drive less hand over complicated matters. And then came the visit. I had no idea what they were planning. I didn't suspect a thing, because who would imagine that the people you gave everything to your womb, your meals, your prayers, would turn around and try to take what little you had left? No, I didn't see it coming, but I should have. I should have known that love, when mixed with entitlement, curdles into something far more bitter than hate. And I should have prepared myself for the moment when even a man of God could be made to doubt me. The days had a rhythm of their own. I woke up before the sun, not because I had to, but because my body had become its own alarm clock. The kettle took 7 minutes to whistle, just long enough for me to wash my face, pat it dry, and feed the cat Mittens, who'd long since gone deaf, but still knew exactly when breakfast was due. I sat in the same chair each morning beside the lace-curtained window that looked out on Maple Avenue, cradling my cup and watching the street come alive. I liked the quiet. I liked the simplicity of things. Warm socks, a crossword puzzle, the way morning light spilled across the floorboards like honey. The world outside had become loud too fast, too cruel in some ways. But here inside my home it was still. It was mine. Most of my days were filled with small rituals. Mondays were for laundry. Tuesdays I called my friend Bernice, who lived 2 towns over in a senior complex with too many rules and not enough tea. Wednesdays I baked something even if no one came to eat it. Thursdays were for organizing drawers I'd already organized. Fridays I went to the church to help fold bulletins. Saturdays I polished silver I never used. Sundays were sacred. That was my life. No great events, no exciting surprises. But it was steady. After a life of raising children, losing a husband, and outliving nearly everyone I once called friend, I had found peace in the predictability of stillness. And yet beneath that calm surface, I had no idea something was slowly curdling. That the people I trusted most had grown restless in their waiting. That to them my quiet life looked less like peace and more like opportunity. It started innocently enough, or maybe I just told myself that to keep the ache at bay. Ellen, my daughter, began stopping by more often, always unannounced, always with that too bright smile. "Just checking in, Mom," she'd say, already opening the fridge, already scanning the mail on the table. She started taking photos of things: my medication bottles, the calendar on the wall, even a burnt pie I'd accidentally left too long in the oven. Then came David, my eldest. He never had much time for visits before, but now he arrived with a kind of rehearsed concern. "How's your memory, Ma? Do you still remember to lock the door?" He'd chuckle afterward as if it were all a harmless joke. But I saw how his eyes lingered too long on the filing cabinet in the hallway, the one where I kept bills and bank statements. It was the little comments that stung the most. "You've got so many papers everywhere," Ellen remarked one day, gathering unopened mail into a neat pile. "It's just not safe to live alone at your age." I began to notice things missing, small things. A bottle of wine, a pair of earrings I hadn't worn in years, a letter from Robert that I kept tucked behind a frame. "You must have misplaced it," Ellen said too quickly. They spoke to each other in hushed voices when they thought I was napping. One afternoon I caught the end of a sentence, "before she does something irreversible." That night, I lay in bed, my heart heavy, my hands clenched under the quilt. I told myself they were just being protective, that children worry, that it came from love. But somewhere deep down, a quiet voice had begun to whisper back, "No, Agnes, this isn't worry. This is a plan." I started forgetting small things, nothing serious, a name a day where I put the envelope of coupons, but somehow every slip turned into a conversation. "Mom, you told me that story already," David would say, his tone soft but patronizing, as if I were a child telling ghost tales. "You just said that yesterday." Sometimes I hadn't, but doubt crept in anyway. Ellen began labeling everything in my pantry with bright stickers, salt, sugar, rice. "It's just easier this way," she said, patting my hand like a nurse in a hospital. When I opened the fridge and saw a laminated note taped to the shelf, "Check expiration dates," I felt something inside me curl inward. They replaced my rotary phone with a blinking plastic thing I didn't recognize. "It's got voice commands," David explained. "You don't have to dial anymore, just say the name." But it didn't work right. I ended up shouting Bernice into a piece of plastic that blinked red and did nothing. One morning, my checkbook was missing. When I asked Ellen, she said, "You must have misplaced it." When I insisted I had left it in the drawer, she gave me a long, slow look. "Maybe you did. Or maybe you're just tired lately." I began writing down everything I did, what I ate when I took my pills, who I called, just so I could point to the truth when the world around me began to shift. But it didn't stop them. They brought up doctors, specialists. "Just to be sure," David said, as if there were already a verdict. I found myself hesitating before answering simple questions. I second-guessed the stove. I stopped driving at night. That quiet voice inside me, it was growing louder now. It was a Thursday afternoon when Ellen called and said, "Father Malcolm wanted to stop by." "Just a short visit," she said, voice breezy. "He mentioned he hadn't seen you in a while." My heart lifted. Father Malcolm had baptized my children, counseled me through Robert's passing, and stood at my side through every Easter vigil and food drive. The thought of seeing him felt like grace. I baked lemon bars. I wore my Sunday blouse. I even set the good china on the coffee table. When they arrived, Ellen, David, and Father Malcolm, I felt a swell of joy. For a moment. But something was off. They sat together on the sofa, too close, too united. Ellen had a manila folder in her lap. David crossed his legs like he was in a board meeting. Father Malcolm's hands were folded tightly, his eyes full of pity. "We've all noticed some changes, Agnes," he began gently. "Little things, forgetfulness, confusion. Your children are concerned." I blinked, the sugar on my lemon bars suddenly too sweet. David leaned forward. "We just want to help. Maybe take some of the burden off your shoulders." Temporarily, Ellen added, "just until things feel more stable. They asked me to sign a document, one that would grant them access to my accounts, the power to manage my bills, the authority to act in my best interest." Father Malcolm reached for my hand. "Agnes, this isn't a judgment. It's just stewardship, a way to let you focus more on your faith." My throat tightened. The tea in my cup had gone cold. They smiled as if they were doing me a kindness, but I saw it now. This wasn't about love. This was a takeover. And worse, it had come wearing the robes of trust. The following Sunday, I arrived at St. Bartholomew's as I always did 10 minutes early, a shawl over my shoulders, Bible in hand. But something was different. The usher, Timmy, barely met my eyes. A few of the parishioners offered me tight smiles before turning away. I found my usual pew, third row from the front on the left side, but it was already taken by Ellen. She was sitting there like she belonged, legs crossed, purse neatly resting beside her, pretending not to notice me. "Mom," she whispered as I stood stunned, "why don't you sit further back today? I think it might be easier." I sat 2 rows behind, alone. Father Malcolm's sermon that morning was about humility and surrender. He didn't look at me once, not when he passed down the aisle, not when he spoke of honoring elders, not even during communion. After service, I waited near the vestibule. I wanted to ask him why. Why the distance? Why the quiet? But when he emerged, he looked surprised to see me. "Agnes," he said, his tone tight. "We weren't expecting you today." "Expecting me?" He motioned me aside toward the coat racks. "I had a conversation with Ellen and David," he said. "They're concerned, deeply. They say you've been acting erratically, spending recklessly, speaking of things that aren't real." I opened my mouth, but no sound came. They suggested, he continued, that perhaps you take a sabbatical, step back from volunteering, from offering advice. I felt the floor tilt. I just think he added that you should focus on prayer and let them handle the worldly concerns for now. He patted my arm as if I were a child sent home from school. That night I didn't eat. I didn't sleep, because the deepest cut had come not from my children, but from the man who once told me I was the pillar of the parish. For the first time in over 60 years, I skipped Sunday service. I woke up before dawn, dressed, put on my shoes, then sat back down on the edge of the bed. The silence in the house was different now, heavier. Not the peaceful hush of solitude, but the aching stillness of exile. I boiled water for tea, but never poured it. Mittens meowed at my feet, confused by the lack of movement, by the absence of my usual patterns. The air itself felt foreign. The phone rang twice that morning, once from Ellen, once from the parish office. I didn't answer either. What could I say? That I had been voted out of my own life, that the people I trusted had locked the doors and left me on the porch. By mid-afternoon, I wandered the house, touching objects like I was reading Braille, the ceramic angel on the mantel, the framed cross-stitch from my mother, the yellowed recipe card in Robert's handwriting. I was looking for something, proof that I still belonged somewhere, evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. My chest tightened when I opened the hallway closet and saw the empty space where my file box used to be. Bank records, medical bills, my will all gone. The silence turned to a buzz, a loud electric hum inside my head. I pressed my palms to my temples and stood there trembling. And that's when I realized I wasn't just being erased, I was being replaced. Bit by bit, breath by breath, they were filling in the cracks of my life with their own names, their own decisions. They had framed it as care, but it was conquest, and I had let them in. The days blurred together after that. I stopped opening the curtains. The sunlight felt invasive, too sharp for a world that had turned so dim. Even Mittens grew quiet, curling beside me like a sentinel to my sorrow. I went through the motions: tea and the morning toast I rarely ate, radio turned low to drown out the hum of my thoughts. But nothing stuck. Time stretched and snapped and circled back. I would catch myself staring at the same page in a book for hours. The mail piled up. I let the answering machine take every call. Even Bernice's voice, cheerful, oblivious, felt like a slap. She still thought I was volunteering at the church, baking for the shelter. I didn't have the strength to correct her. At night, I lay in bed replaying the moment Father Malcolm said they're concerned. That word concerned curled itself around my throat like a noose. Not angry, not disappointed, concerned. As if I were a broken fence or a loose stair. I cried. Quietly, bitterly. Tears that felt different from those I'd shed for Robert. This wasn't grief, it was erasure. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't recognize her. My robe sagged at the shoulders. My hair had thinned into wild silver threads. My eyes were sunken, yes, but it was the hollowness behind them that frightened me. I whispered aloud, "Am I going mad?" And for the first time, the question didn't feel ridiculous. Because if no one believes you, if your memories are questioned and your choices overwritten, then what's the difference between madness and being outvoted? That day, I sat in the kitchen for hours, the envelope from the electric company unopened in front of me. I had never felt more invisible. When the credit card company called, I didn't recognize the charge. A new television, some Bluetooth speaker I didn't own either. "I'm sure it's just a mix-up," Ellen said when I asked. "We've been helping with some things, making your life easier." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the checkbook was still missing. And now so was the silver bracelet Robert gave me on our 30th anniversary. That week I canceled my subscription to the local newspaper. I stopped buying my favorite marmalade. I turned down the thermostat and wore a heavier sweater. Small things maybe, but they felt like offerings, sacrifices to keep the peace. I didn't confront them. I wasn't ready for a fight. Not yet. Instead, I began scaling back, shrinking inward, trying to make myself less of a target. I told myself if I made fewer waves, maybe they'd stop circling. I skipped the community potluck, stopped calling Bernice. I didn't want to explain why my children now had keys to my house, or why I no longer had access to my own online banking. At night, I replayed every moment they had looked at me with forced smiles and narrowed eyes. And slowly, I began to understand the terms of my new reality. My freedom came at a price, and if I wanted to keep what little I had left, my dignity, my space, my name on the mailbox, I had to surrender the rest. So I did, quietly, reluctantly, shamefully. I told Father Malcolm I needed time away from volunteering. I let Ellen start ordering groceries online. I stopped insisting on writing my own checks. They called it help. But I knew what it really was. It was surrender in slow motion. It happened on a Tuesday, the sky overcast and the wind biting. I wrapped myself in Robert's old coat and walked to the bus stop. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't leave a note. The church office was quiet. The receptionist greeted me with a surprised smile. "Father Malcolm's not in yet," she said. "That's all right," I replied, clutching my purse tighter. "I'm here to see the attorney." She blinked. "The church attorney?" "Yes." 2 days earlier, I had found the folder. It was buried beneath a stack of photo albums, my original deed, my living will, and something else, a letter Robert had written me before his surgery years ago. A goodbye just in case. In it, he said, "If you ever feel alone, Agnes, remember this house is your kingdom. Never let them make you a guest inside it." Those words lit something inside me. Not rage, not revenge, just resolve. So I sat down with Mr. Kendricks, the church's longtime legal advisor. He was an old man himself, gentle and discreet. I explained my wishes clearly. Upon my death, the house would belong to the church. In the meantime, I would retain full legal rights to live there unbothered. "No one can reverse this unless you authorize it," he said, reviewing the paperwork. "Good," I answered, "because no one knows I'm doing it." He gave me a long look. "Not even your family, especially not them." I signed the documents with a steady hand. It was the quietest rebellion I'd ever made. A sacrifice not of home, but of inheritance. Not to punish, but to protect. My house would go to God, not to greed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. I didn't expect anything to change overnight. I didn't expect to feel victorious. What I didn't expect was the loneliness that followed. You see, once you take a step like that, there's no going back. I had made peace with God, but peace with people. That's a harder thing to earn when they've already decided who you are. Ellen stopped visiting. At first she made excuses, just busy with the kids, flu going around. Then she stopped calling entirely. David still sent emails now and then, always short, always formal. "Please remember your checkup next week. I'll renew your car insurance." Not a word about birthdays, not a question about how I was feeling. The silence from Father Malcolm cut the deepest. Weeks passed. No calls, no visits. He had once been my spiritual anchor, but now I was just another burden he'd gladly handed off. I saw the shift in the church bulletin, my name removed from the volunteer roster. The space where my banana bread used to sit at coffee hour now held store-bought cookies. No one asked why. No one knocked. I didn't cry like before, but there was a weight to the quiet, a thickness to it, like walking through fog that no wind could lift. The house once filled with echoes of family and prayer now hummed with absence. I started talking out loud to Robert again, telling him about the weather, the news, the way I'd beaten the toaster into working again. I didn't regret what I did, but sacrifice always leaves a scar, even when it's righteous. I had traded legacy for freedom, but freedom is cold when no one wants to share it with you. It came in the form of a letter, plain envelope, no return address, postmarked 2 towns over. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, clinical, cold, notice of proposed guardianship petition in the matter of Agnes Dwyer, filed by Ellen Temple and David Dwyer. Hearing date pending. I sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, the letter clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. Guardianship. As if I were a child. As if I needed to be managed, overseen, controlled. So this was their next move. The soft pressure hadn't worked. The sweet smiles and staged concern had failed. Now they would go to court. Now they would make it official. They were going to try to take everything. And they didn't even have the decency to tell me themselves. The next morning, I put on lipstick for the first time in months. I pulled my hair back, found a blouse with buttons that still closed, and walked to the public library. I spent 3 hours on the computer, learning everything I could about guardianship law, property rights, legal precedent. I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't alone, not entirely. I had allies, quiet ones they'd overlooked. Mr. Kendricks, for one. And a retired judge named Ruth who played bridge with Bernice and still owed me a favor from a fundraiser back in 2006. I printed forms. I took notes. By the time I returned home, I wasn't trembling. I was boiling. And in that fire, I found something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Purpose. They thought I'd lie down and wait for them to bury me in paperwork and pity. But they'd mistaken quiet for weakness. And I was done playing the fool. That night I stood in the doorway of my living room, the lamplight soft and golden, casting shadows across the photographs on the mantel. Robert's face smiled back at me from a time before illness, before silence. Our children younger and freer, frozen in a Christmas that once felt eternal. I stared at them for a long time, as if trying to see through the years and into their hearts before ambition took root, before the hunger for control wore down their love. I whispered, "I don't know who they are anymore." Then I turned away. I took out a yellow notepad and began writing. Not a diary, not a plea, a plan. Step 1. Call Mr. Kendricks. Confirm the paperwork had been filed with the county. Step 2. Meet with Judge Ruth. Bring documentation. Step 3. Gather character statements from Bernice, from the church's older volunteers, even from the grocer who'd known me for 30 years. Step 4. Stop hiding. If they wanted a hearing, I would give them one, but not as the dazed old woman they painted me to be. I would walk into that courtroom with clarity, dignity, and every ounce of strength they'd forgotten I had. They mistook kindness for fragility, trust for ignorance, faith for foolishness. Let them. By the time I blew out the candle beside my bed, I felt something settle in my bones, not bitterness, not even anger, something steadier, resolve. I was Agnes Dwyer, I was not gone, and I was not done. It started with a drawer I hadn't opened in years. I was looking for a copy of my old passport, something to prove I'd traveled alone, paid my way, lived a competent life. But what I found instead was a stack of letters wrapped in ribbon, yellowed with time. They were from Robert. Not love letters, but records, receipts, notes about the house when the roof was redone, the plumber he trusted the name of the woman at the county clerk's office who helped him when he filed the last deed adjustment. I read each one, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. Robert had always believed in record-keeping. Someday it'll matter, he'd say. And now it did. I followed the breadcrumbs. On Friday morning, I made my way to the county courthouse, papers in hand. The clerk at the property records office, a woman named Lila, was surprised to see me. "Most folks your age send someone in their place," she said kindly. "Most folks my age aren't being erased by their own children," I replied. She looked at me a moment longer and nodded. "Let's take a look." Within 15 minutes, we had a printed copy of the grant deed, the church's name listed as transferee with language confirming my life estate. Ironclad, witnessed, filed, and legally binding. "Can they challenge this?" I asked. "They can try," Lila said. "But they'd lose." I folded the document carefully, tucking it into a manila envelope. Proof. I finally had proof. They thought I was weak. But I had something far stronger than noise or drama. I had truth signed and sealed, and now I had a copy of it. That night I sat at my kitchen table, the manila envelope beside my cup of tea, and let the past wash over me. The house wasn't just a house. It was the story of us, of Robert and me, of our sacrifices, our joys, our faith, and the deed transfer to the church. It wasn't a last-minute reaction. It was something Robert had once talked about long before illness clouded his days. He'd mentioned it one evening after a church fundraiser. "When we're gone, this house should serve the Lord," he'd said. "Let it shelter more than just memories." I had dismissed it at the time, thinking it poetic but impractical. But Robert, as always, had been quietly persistent. In the back of our filing cabinet was a folder labeled Legacy. I pulled it out and opened it. His handwriting, so careful, so meticulous, outlined a vision. He had already begun the process years ago. Notes from conversations with church officials, meeting dates with Mr. Kendricks, even drafts of letters he never sent. Robert had seen the future more clearly than I had. Maybe he had sensed the hunger in our children. Maybe he knew faith outlasts bloodlines. I realized then that what I had done wasn't just an act of protection. It was the continuation of his will, his foresight, his love. The deed wasn't my weapon, it was ours. And it had been waiting quietly, patiently for the right moment to matter. I pressed my palm against the folder. "Thank you," I whispered. Because Robert wasn't gone. Not really. He had been preparing for this all along. The next morning, I brewed fresh coffee, set out a notepad, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Bernice speaking." I smiled. "It's Agnes." A pause, then a sharp inhale. "Agnes Dwyer, Lord above. I thought you were in Tahiti or something. You've gone quiet on me." I chuckled. "Not Tahiti, just a different kind of storm." I told her everything. At first she was silent. Then the fury bubbled up. "They filed for guardianship. Without even telling you, that's elder abuse, plain and simple. You know what? I'm not just angry. I'm insulted. On your behalf. Can you do something for me?" I asked. "Anything. I need a character reference, and I need Judge Ruth. Bridge night is Thursday. She still cheats with her eyebrows, but I'll get her on the phone tonight. You'll have backup." I thanked her deeply, not just for the help, but for reminding me that friendship could still mean something, that I wasn't entirely alone in this world of maneuvering and masks. By noon, I had made 5 more calls, one to the pastor's secretary requesting a formal meeting, one to the Meals on Wheels coordinator I used to volunteer with, one to a neighbor whose gutters I had cleared every fall. Each of them said the same thing. "Of course, you just tell us where and when." The army I was building wasn't loud, it wasn't young, but it was loyal, and most importantly, it believed me. The walls they tried to build around me had cracks now, and through those cracks, light was beginning to pour. The meeting with Judge Ruth took place at her kitchen table, not in a courtroom. She wore a cardigan dotted with biscuit crumbs and brewed a pot of chamomile tea as if we were discussing recipes, not survival. "So," she said, stirring in honey, "they want to declare you incompetent." I nodded. "They're calling it guardianship. I call it theft." She smiled faintly. "Good. You still have fight in you." We went over everything, the deed, the timeline, the sudden behavior shift in Ellen and David. I handed her the file folder Robert had labeled Legacy, along with the notarized paperwork from Mr. Kendricks. "This is airtight," she said after scanning the documents. "The church owns the house after you pass, But until then, it's yours. And unless a doctor declares you incapable of managing daily living, they don't have a leg to stand on. Would you be willing to testify? I asked quietly. She didn't hesitate. Absolutely. And more than that, I'll help you file a counterpetition. You're not just defending yourself now, you're going on offense. The next day, I met with Mr. Kendricks again. He agreed to serve as my counsel pro bono. I've known your family for decades, he said, adjusting his glasses. And I always suspected the kids didn't inherit your integrity. We drafted letters, filed motions, attached exhibits. I felt like a woman stepping back into her own skin. Each signature I scrawled reminded me that I still had agency, still had rights. And for the first time in months, my name, Agnes Dwyer, stood beside the word petitioner. Not respondent, not victim, petitioner. The next step was money. Ellen and David had already assumed I wouldn't notice the quiet withdrawals, the changed passwords, the suspicious purchases. But I had noticed, and now I was ready. With Mr. Kendrick's help, I ordered a full forensic review of my accounts, every bank statement, credit card charge, and recurring transaction over the last 6 months. It painted a clear picture, one of creeping entitlement disguised as assistance. They'd enrolled me in subscriptions I never approved, ordered items delivered to Ellen's address. David had even rerouted my gas bill to a joint account in his name. When I showed Judge Ruth, she frowned deeply. This is textbook financial exploitation. No guardianship judge in the county will touch this with a 10-foot pole. Still, I wanted more than just defense. I wanted protection. So I met with a financial advisor, a woman named Janine, who wore sharp glasses and sharper instincts. She walked me through setting up a living trust. We moved what funds I had into secure, controlled accounts with oversight from a neutral fiduciary, not family. Next came the will, a new one, clear, legally updated, with explicit language about my wishes, my boundaries, and my legacy. Bernice helped me draft a letter to the church board reaffirming the deed and adding a statement of intent that the house was meant to serve the community, not my children's ambition. Each document, each signature, was another brick in the wall I was building high, solid, impossible to scale. Let them try, I thought. They'd find no doors left open. Not anymore. The hearing date was set. March 17th, 10:00 a.m., County Civil Courthouse, Courtroom 4B. It was printed in bold ink on the notice that arrived in my mailbox, a simple sheet of paper that made my hands shake and my spine straighten. I circled the date on my calendar. Red ink. A reminder that I had only a few weeks left to prepare not just my case, but myself. I started small. A haircut, a proper blouse, shoes that didn't pinch. Then came the harder parts, practicing my testimony, rehearsing answers to questions that would no doubt try to make me look frail, confused, or defensive. I enlisted Bernice to role play. She was ruthless, bless her heart, cutting me off mid-sentence, frowning with faux skepticism, poking holes in my explanations. "I love you," she'd say after each round, "but if I didn't know you, I'd assume you were hiding something. Now start again stronger. I hated it, but I needed it." Meanwhile, Janine helped me assemble a binder, tabbed, color-coded, financial documents, medical records, proof of self-sufficiency, a signed letter from my doctor confirming my mental clarity, a character statement from the Meals on Wheels coordinator, even a handwritten note from the librarian who'd known me since the 90s. I made 3 copies. On the final night before the hearing, I laid everything out on the dining room table, evidence of a life lived carefully, intentionally, quietly. Not perfect, but mine. I didn't pray for victory. I prayed for the strength to sit tall and speak clearly. Let the world hear my voice. One more time. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. I dressed in silence. Navy skirt, cream blouse, my mother's brooch pinned near the collarbone. The kitchen felt colder than usual, or maybe I was just too aware of everything, every creak in the floorboards, every tick of the clock. Bernice arrived at 7 sharp, armed with coffee and a tote bag full of tissues. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be," I said. We drove in silence. When we pulled into the courthouse lot, I saw David's SUV already parked. Ellen stood beside it on the phone, her heels tapping anxiously against the pavement. She didn't see me, but I saw her. I saw the power suit, the binder under her arm, the practiced urgency in her voice. She was prepared, polished, ready to present her version of me, a woman lost in time, confused by technology, drowning in sentiment. But I was ready too. I stepped through the courthouse doors with my head high, my papers clutched firmly, my spine straight. Inside the courtroom, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries weight. A clerk checked us in. A bailiff nodded politely. The judge, a young woman with a no-nonsense expression, entered promptly and called the case. Docket 17B, Temple and Dwyer v. Dwyer. There it was. My name, cold and clinical, on official record, but no longer just theirs to control. As I took my seat at the petitioner's table, I felt a shift. Not in the room, in me. There was no turning back now, and I didn't want to. I was not here to beg. I was here to be heard. David wasn't prepared. He masked it well at first. Buttoned suit, stiff nod, legal pad in hand, but I saw the twitch in his jaw, the tremble in the pen as he took notes he didn't need. When the judge asked who would be speaking first, he shot a glance at Ellen, who subtly shook her head. So he stood and stumbled. "Your Honor," he began, "we're here today because we're deeply concerned about our mother's well-being." It sounded rehearsed, hollow. She's been forgetful, erratic. She's refused help. She's made financial decisions that are frankly irresponsible for someone at her stage of life. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have documentation of these behaviors?" David hesitated. "We've observed them firsthand. Have you submitted statements from her physician? No. But in psychological evaluations." He swallowed. "No, Your Honor." It unraveled from there. The judge, young but razor-sharp, asked precise questions. Dates, incidents, evidence. David floundered. He cited the missing checkbook, the new will. "She's given away the house," he said, voice rising. To a church, the judge clarified, via a legal deed notarized and filed. "That is her right." He shifted in his seat. By the time he sat down, the courtroom was silent. The illusion of control, the image of the dutiful son, had begun to crack. His hands trembled as he flipped through pages of nothing. I watched him closely. And for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was a boy who broke a window and blamed the wind. Panic. Ellen went next. She rose with the poise of someone used to managing impressions, her blazer crisp, her voice even. "Your Honor, we love our mother. We've only ever wanted to protect her." She recounted stories, misplaced keys, burned toast, the time I'd called her twice in one day, and told the same story. She didn't even remember she'd already told me, Ellen said, placing a hand over her heart. "That's not normal." The judge nodded slowly. "And you consulted a doctor?" "No, but we've seen the signs. Signs are not diagnoses." Ellen's jaw tensed. We were trying to be gentle, to avoid upsetting her further. When asked about financial concerns, Ellen faltered. We noticed unusual activity on her accounts, subscriptions, charitable donations. The judge raised an eyebrow. "To her church, to Meals on Wheels." "Yes, but those don't appear unusual for someone with a history of faith-based volunteering." Ellen's voice cracked slightly. "She's isolating. She refuses help. She's pushing us away, or the judge said she's asserting boundaries. That landed like a stone." Ellen's hands clenched around her notes. Her polished exterior faltered. Her gaze darted toward David, who now stared fixedly at the table. It was all unraveling. Their narrative of concern was slipping through their fingers, and underneath it, something far less flattering was beginning to show: entitlement, control, fear. Ellen sat down slowly. I caught the flicker in her eyes, widened, glossy, uncertain. It was the look of someone realizing she'd underestimated the very woman she tried to silence. Fear. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Dwyer, you may respond." I stood slowly, the folder in my hands trembling just a little, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I'd carried for months. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. I am not confused. I am not reckless. I am not lost. I opened the binder, pulled out copies of the deed, transfer my will, the bank audit, the letter from my physician. I am deliberate. I spoke plainly. About the gaslighting, the subtle theft, the humiliation of being told by my own children and my pastor that I couldn't be trusted with my own life. I didn't cry, but I saw Ellen blink fast. David clenched his jaw. I've volunteered at my church for over 40 years, I said. I've managed budgets, planned events, cooked for hundreds. I kept our family afloat when Robert was sick. I still balance my checkbook in ink. I still remember every hymn in the Blue Book. The courtroom was silent. I gave them everything I said. And they mistook my grace for weakness, my age for absence, my silence for surrender. I looked directly at the judge. But I am here. I am present. And I am not handing over the rest of my life because my children decided they're tired of waiting. When I sat back down, the air had changed. I could feel it, a current shifting. Even the judge took a moment before speaking again, and when she did, her voice was quiet. Thank you, Mrs. Dwyer. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first time I'd seen my children look smaller than me. It started with a sigh from David, audible, frustrated. As the judge turned her attention to the exhibits, he leaned toward Ellen, whispering sharply. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her face flush, saw her shake her head. The cracks were widening. The judge requested clarification about their previous attempts to obtain power of attorney. Ellen stammered. We were just trying to help. The judge nodded. Help without transparency or consent can sometimes look a lot like control. That's when it happened, David snapped. You think this is about control, he said loud enough to hush the room. She's not well. She gave away our inheritance to a church. A church? Ellen hissed at him to sit down, but he kept going. We've been cleaning up after her for months. We paid her bills, took over her prescriptions, made sure she didn't set the kitchen on fire. You changed my bank login, I said. He turned on me. Because you were making irrational choices. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Dwyer, please, you're not helping your case. But the dam had broken. You have no idea what it's like, David said. Watching your own mother fall apart. Waiting for the call that she's wandered into traffic or let someone scam her out of the roof over her head. I didn't fall, I said quietly. You just stopped looking at me. That shut him up. The judge called for a recess. As we filed out, Ellen's heels clicked faster than usual. David stayed behind, gripping the table like it might hold him up. Their strategy had imploded. Not because of what I said, but because they couldn't hide the truth anymore. This was never about my safety. It was about their fear. During the recess, I stepped into the hallway, the hum of vending machines and muffled footsteps swirling around me. Bernice stood by the water fountain, her lips pressed tight. They're losing, she whispered. They know it too, I replied. When we returned to the courtroom, Ellen had changed tactics. Her voice was softer, her posture smaller. Your Honor, she said, perhaps we rushed this. Maybe we didn't handle things perfectly, but we were scared. We thought we were doing what was right. It was almost convincing. Until the judge asked, then why file for full guardianship without consulting your mother? Ellen's silence spoke louder than any apology. David, desperate, shifted back into performance mode. If we could just talk privately, maybe? No, I said firmly, standing again. There will be no more hallway conversations, no more private concerns. If you have something to say it here. The judge didn't stop me. In fact, I saw her nod. David flushed. You're ruining everything we've tried to do for you. No, I replied. You're angry that I didn't need saving. He looked to Ellen, then to the judge, then back to me. He was cornered and he knew it. In a last-ditch attempt, he pulled out a folder of his own emails, credit card charges, screenshots. The judge took them, skimmed the contents, then set them down. These are not signs of incompetence, she said. They are signs of independence. It was done. I saw it in their shoulders, in their silence. Their case had collapsed, and the desperation in their eyes confirmed what I had suspected all along. They never thought I would fight back. The ruling came the next morning. Guardianship denied. The judge cited lack of medical evidence, violation of due process, and most importantly, my clear and convincing demonstration of competence. I sat quietly as the words were read, my hands folded in my lap, my breath steady. David and Ellen said nothing. They didn't look at me. But the fallout didn't wait. Within a week, I received a call from their bank. David's name had been flagged in a fraud investigation. It turned out he had used my Social Security number to apply for a low-interest loan. The paperwork surfaced during the audit we'd initiated. A second call came from Ellen's workplace. Someone had anonymously forwarded a copy of the guardianship petition. Apparently, her HR department frowned on employees pursuing legal control over elderly parents without disclosure. By the end of the month, David's position at his firm was under review, and Ellen had taken a sudden, indefinite leave of absence. I hadn't planned for any of that. I didn't gloat. But I also didn't feel sorry, because the truth has gravity. It pulls things into light. They had gambled on my silence, on my weakness, and they lost. The bank accounts were locked. Legal letters flew back and forth. Whatever nest egg they thought they were protecting for me or for themselves was gone. It hadn't been stolen. It had simply been shielded. By me. Because when you spend a lifetime being quiet people forget, you can also be precise, and I had been precise. News traveled fast in a town like ours. By the following Sunday, whispers trailed behind David and Ellen like storm clouds. St. Bartholomew's wasn't the kind of place that relished scandal, but neither did it forget who brought the potato salad to funerals or who scrubbed the altar cloths on Saturday mornings. Ellen's friends no longer waved in the parking lot. David's golfing buddies stopped returning his calls. Even Father Malcolm, who once spoke of their sincere intentions, had grown distant. At coffee hour, I returned to my usual spot, the third pew, left side 6 seats from the front. No one sat there in the weeks I was gone. That Sunday, Bernice joined me. "I always knew you'd come back," she said. The bulletin listed me once more under volunteers for the spring food drive. Later that afternoon, Ellen showed up at my front door. No makeup, no smile. "Can we talk?" she asked. I opened the door wider, but didn't invite her in. She looked around, eyes landing on the living room she used to call hers. "People are saying things. At the school, at church." I nodded. Truth has a way of spreading. Her eyes welled. "We didn't mean to—" "You meant to take control," I said. "You just didn't expect me to keep mine." She stepped back, stung. "I just wanted to protect you." "No," I replied. "You wanted to protect the version of me that didn't say no." She didn't answer, only turned and walked to her car. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, not in celebration, but in mourning, not for what I lost, but for what they chose to become. The dust settled. There were no more court dates, no more letters in the mail, no more phone calls from banks or attorneys. Just silence. And in that silence, the weight of everything that had happened pressed in. David stopped speaking to me entirely. I heard through a neighbor that he and his wife had listed their house. Something about downsizing, though everyone knew it was fallout. Ellen sent one more email. A line or two. No apology, just a note that she'd be taking space. I didn't reply. People assume resolution brings peace. But sometimes it brings something lonelier space too wide to cross truths too raw to heal. I went back to my routines, folding bulletins, tending to the lilacs, polishing the silver. But the house felt larger now. Echoes stretched longer. The stillness no longer wrapped around me like a blanket. It pressed. I wasn't sad, not entirely. I was clear. I was safe. But I was also alone in a way I hadn't been before. Robert used to say after every storm, something changes its shape. He was right. The storm had passed, and I had changed. I no longer waited for calls that didn't come. I no longer clung to a version of motherhood where love meant letting myself be drained. I made tea for one, read aloud to myself, relearned how to fill silence without apology, One evening, as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's oak, I sat on the porch with mittens curled at my feet. The wind picked up gentle but insistent. And for the first time since it all began, I breathed deep and slow. Not because I was waiting, but because I had finally stopped. Spring arrived slowly, shy and uncertain, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The first sign came from the lilac bushes, tiny green buds pushing out from tired limbs. Then came the robins, noisy and urgent, declaring with their song that the world would go on. And so would I. It started with the curtains. I washed them all, stripped every window bare, and let the sun pour in warm and unapologetic. I donated clothes I hadn't worn in years, rearranged furniture, moved the armchair to the window where I could drink my morning tea and watch the neighborhood come back to life. I made a list: paint the porch railing, fix the pantry door, replant the herb garden. Not because anyone was coming, but because I was staying. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like mine again. One afternoon, I walked to the corner store, something I hadn't done in months. The clerk, a teenager with chipped nail polish and a soft voice, smiled and said, "Haven't seen you in a while, Mrs. Dwyer." "I've been resting," I said. "Glad you're back." It struck me as strange how much that mattered, those 3 words from someone barely old enough to vote. But it did. It mattered. That night, I opened the window before bed and let the breeze drift in. It smelled like dirt and flowers and something else I couldn't name. Possibility. Freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't a parade or a speech. It was a quiet walk to the store. Clean curtains, a window cracked open just enough to remind you you're still here. And that matters. Each morning began the same way: a cup of tea, a walk around the garden, and a moment of stillness before the world stirred. But now, instead of moving through the motions out of habit or sorrow, I moved with intention. I started volunteering again, not at the church, not yet, but at the local food pantry. They welcomed me without questions, without whispers. Just a clipboard and a name tag, Agnes, handwritten in bold black ink. There was comfort in sorting cans and organizing shelves, in chatting with the single mother who came in every Thursday, or the elderly man who always brought an extra bag just to give something back. They didn't know my story. They didn't need to. I found rhythm in the quiet work. Mondays became pantry days. Tuesdays I baked again, just small batches. I left muffins on my neighbor's porch. I mailed banana bread to Bernice. On Wednesdays, I walked the long way to the park. I sat on a bench near the fountain and watched the children chase bubbles and the dogs chase children. No one asked me to do these things. That was the beauty of it. I no longer waited for permission. I read again real books, not articles about elder law. I called Bernice once a week, not to vent, but to laugh. I even fixed the pantry door with a new hinge I ordered myself. Little things, but they added up. Routines once used to contain me had become rituals of reclamation. And somewhere between sorting green beans and watching sparrows build nests outside my window, I realized something: I wasn't rebuilding the life I had before. I was building something new. It began with a dust-covered box in the attic. I'd gone up there looking for extra blankets and stumbled upon it by accident, an old shoebox marked choir in Robert's handwriting. Inside were sheet music, yellowed lyric sheets, and a tiny cassette recorder. I brought it downstairs, plugged it in, and pressed play. A crackle, then a piano. Then our voices, young, earnest, shaky, but proud. Robert on the keys, me leading soprano. Abide With Me recorded in the church basement for Easter 1983. I didn't cry, I sang. Not out loud, not yet. But I hummed. I remembered the notes, the harmonies, the feeling. That week I visited the community center, asked about classes, signed up for their Thursday evening music group. We don't perform, the coordinator warned. We just gather and sing. Perfect. My voice was rusty, but it returned like an old friend, hesitant at first, then stronger with each verse. I rediscovered the joy of sound rising in shared space, of no one watching, no one judging. One of the women in the group, Marjorie, played the ukulele. Another Tom had once toured with a barbershop quartet. We laughed more than we rehearsed. Sometimes we didn't even finish songs, and it didn't matter. because I felt alive in that room. Music, I realized, was never about performance. It was about breath, about memory, about stitching together broken pieces through melody. Every Thursday I came home lighter. My kitchen echoed with humming. My heart kept tempo. What they tried to take from me, my voice I had found again. And this time I wasn't giving it up. It took me 3 tries to write the letter. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because the words felt heavier when written in ink. Dear Father Malcolm. I paused after the salutation, then continued. You hurt me, not with malice, but with doubt, with your silence, with your willingness to believe their version of me without ever asking for mine. I folded the first draft, placed it on the counter, and left it there for 2 days. Then I rewrote it. You taught me about grace, about listening, about patience. But when I needed those things from you, you offered me formality instead. A checklist, a signature. I'm not angry anymore. But I am changed. The final letter was short, honest, and kind, but not soft. I mailed it on a Tuesday. A week later, a knock came at the door. When I opened it there, he stood older than I remembered, more bent at the shoulders. May I come in, he asked. I let him. We sat in silence at first. The clock ticked louder than usual. Then he said, I failed you. I said nothing. I thought I was doing the right thing, he continued, trusting family. But I forgot that trust is not loyalty, and age is not confusion. He pulled from his pocket a small wooden cross. This belonged to my mentor. I kept it when he passed. It reminded me to be humble. He placed it on the table between us. I forgot that, Agnes, and I'm sorry. I looked at the cross, then at the man I once called my shepherd. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. Because reaching out doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to build bridges where walls once stood. Word spread, as it always does, but this time not as rumor, as story. A few weeks after the hearing, a woman approached me at the food pantry, gray curls, nervous hands, voice barely above a whisper. I heard what you did, she said. I'm going through something similar. My son wants to move me to a facility, says it's for my safety. But it doesn't feel like safety. I listened. I didn't offer advice, just presence. Later, another volunteer brought me a tin of cookies and asked, would you talk to my aunt? She's feeling trapped. And she's scared. I said yes. It happened again and again. Not in loud ways, not in public speeches, but in living rooms over tea and whispered corners of grocery aisles. Women older overlooked began to find me, not because I was special, but because I had endured and because I had spoken. I started jotting down stories, not just mine, but theirs. Patterns emerged: financial control, subtle dismissals, legal tricks wrapped in loving language. So I asked the community center to host a workshop. Protecting Your Voice: Legal and Personal Tools for Independent Living. They gave me the Tuesday slot. 10 women came to the first meeting. By the 3rd week, we needed a bigger room. We shared strategies, printed checklists, and more importantly, listened. No one had all the answers. But together we remembered something we'd almost forgotten. We were not alone. And the life we'd built brick by brick, prayer by prayer, was worth defending. Even if we had to do it quietly, even if we had to do it late. I wrote it on a quiet Thursday morning, not because I had to, because I wanted to, because some words are meant to be left behind, not as warnings, but as reminders. Dear Ellen and David, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I don't mean that to be dramatic. I mean it as fact. Someday my body will rest, and this house will belong to the church just as I planned. You may not understand that. You may never agree with it, but I hope you'll come to see that this choice was never about punishment. It was about preservation. This home was built with love and sacrifice, not just walls and wood, but memories, labor, devotion. It is sacred, and sacred things are not meant to be fought over. They are meant to be honored. You hurt me. Not with cruelty, but with assumption. You believed age meant weakness, that silence meant surrender, that trust was something to exploit. And yet, I still love you. That's the stubborn truth of motherhood. I don't know what you'll become after I'm gone, but I hope you'll soften. I hope someday you'll walk through this town and someone will say, "Oh, you're Agnes Dwyer's child," and you'll be proud, not of what you tried to take, but of what I chose to give. My legacy is not in this house. It's in what you decide to do next. With love. Mom. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer by the piano, and closed it gently. Some truths aren't for courtrooms. They're for eternity. Some endings aren't loud. They don't come with applause or closure. They come quietly, like dusk slipping into night, like the way a song fades, not because it ends, but because it knows when to stop. These days, my life is simple. I wake early. I walk slowly. I tend to my plants and let the world arrive without rushing to meet it. I still sing on Thursdays. I still write notes to Bernice in the margins of recipe cards. I still talk to Robert in the garden, his favorite stone now marked with lilies. The house is warm not because of who's in it, but because of who I've become in it. Not a victim, not a widow, not a woman surviving betrayal, but Agnes, just Agnes. I think sometimes about legacy, not the kind written into deeds or etched into headstones, but the kind that lives in choices, in courage, in the quiet refusal to disappear. I think about the women I've met, the ones who whisper their stories, who carry their pain folded in their purses like old photos. I see them now, and they see me. That is enough. Peace, I've learned, doesn't come when the world agrees with you. It comes when you agree with yourself. One morning, I'll leave this house. Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but when I do, it will not be with bitterness. It will be with hands open, heart full, and the knowledge that I lived not just on my terms, but with grace. Until then, I will keep the porch swept, the kettle warm, and the lilacs blooming. And if anyone asks where to find me, tell them this: I am home.